Hello guys, this is T29E3, and today's video is going to be a post-build review, which is basically a kit review after I've finished the building process, so I can go into a little more depth about specific issues, and talking about things I'd improve, or things I'd change, or things I did change, and basically anything that I think you guys should know about if you're actually building this kit. Now this kit is Takom's T29E3, it's a relatively recent kit, and it's definitely a fun kit to build. I know that Hobby Boss also releases a T29, I think it's not the E3. I actually completely forget about it. I'm pretty sure it's just the T29, which is basically this, without the rangefinders, these big things on the side of the turret there. So it's just kind of like, a more standard turret shape. I'm not exactly sure how that Hobby Boss kit compares to this at all. I'm just going to talk about this kit here. So the overall kind of like level of difficulty is not that hard in this kit. It seems to be aimed more towards beginner modelers, maybe people who are maybe playing World of Tanks and want to build some model kits, because this kit is, I'm pretty sure they only made this kit because of World of Tanks has popularized these super heavy vehicles basically. All the box are camouflage patterns, everything like that. They're all camouflage patterns that are exactly in World of Tanks. The markings are the same. So of course I think that's where they're taking their inspiration from. This is a real tank, of course. They built a couple of these. It's mainly like a late war thing that they were like, well, we gotta fight King Tigers, so let's make something even bigger than a King Tiger. And it has, I think, about 20 inches of armor on the front of the turret, if you include the mantlet and the turret front. So it is quite a beast, but it's definitely a good kit to build. Yeah, the level of complexity is basically not exactly Tamiya-esque, because Tamiya can often oversimplify some parts and make, the details a little bit iffy sometimes. But meanwhile, other manufacturers like, let's say, Trumpeter and Dragon, they can often overcomplicate things and make sub-assemblies many, many more parts than they really need to be. And then it just kind of makes it less fun because you have to spend so much time building these little things and you don't feel like you get much out of it. This kit seemed to be a great balance between the two. Nothing was more complicated than it needed to be. They seemed like they did some good engineering options, or engineering ideas basically, of how they designed it, but in a couple of places, it's Takom. And they are often known for having very, very large, sprue attachment points, and often sprue attachment points in weird spots when they could just be moved somewhere else. So I guess we should start this off by talking about all the things that I've done to the kit. So you might notice the turret is a slightly different color. It's because I've actually primed it. I had to do a little bit of work on the cast texture and filling some seams. We're going to talk about that later. I've also sliced off a section of the rear fender here, just because I kind of wanted to make some interesting features of it. There also are exhausts and a 50 caliber machine gun. I think those are actually inside the hull right now. Yeah, I'll actually put them on later when I talk about the kit. I just left them off because I'm leaving them separate to paint them. A couple other places, like over here, I've replaced like a molded on detail, basically that little styling rod right there. I just basically sliced off the kit part because I didn't want to clean up the seam line on it. I just basically put on a actual piece of styrene rod instead of the same size, so I was just like, a 20-second fix. Now, weld seams on this kit, I'm pretty sure if I was going to go all out, basically I would need probably a lot more than I added. I only added the ones that I basically thought were necessary, because if I'm going to go through and put all the weld seams on there, I'm also going to want to put some photo etch and kind of go all out then. So I only actually added weld seams on the front here. I've added them right along the sides of these toe mounts basically. And in the kit, they actually kind of sort of did that. Basically this separate piece there, the actual toe shackle mount, whatever, had basically like a 45-degree flange molded into the bottom that kind of just stuck out, and it kind of looked like a weld seam, but there was no texture at all to it. It was just basically a flat piece and looked kind of like just a flat piece of metal. So I basically sliced those off, and then I replaced it with some actual styrene rod, and I actually gave it the weld seam texture. Very, very easy to do. Also did the same thing on the rear of the hull over here. Actually in a very similar spot. Oh, right inside. Basically the same place on the rear here. Also on the rear of the turret, I haven't actually added the antenna mounts in these little spots there. I'll show you the kit parts here. Basically they are kind of ruined with some, if I can get that to focus. There's basically a really nasty seam line on them, might be able to see that. And it basically just makes the kit part kind of not usable, because it kind of ruins the actual texture to it. I could probably figure out how to make these work, but I'm going to see if my local store has some photo etch ones, because they have some photo etch German ones I know. So I'll see if I can get some photo etch US ones and just stick them in there because that look much better. So let's start with the turret and kind of work down the hull basically. So the turret itself is, well, it's larger than a Panzer 1. Actually, I'm building a Panzer 1 kit currently. And it's quite fun to compare the two actually. It's a very, very large turret. The cast texture they mold on the turret is actually very, very good. Most of what you see here, the cast texture, is actually basically what the kit has on it. I actually basically had to work on a couple areas. Mainly, of course, there's basically a seam along the side here. Basically, there's the bottom and the top. You can actually see the cast texture they give you on the bottom. If you can see that, that's actually the kit molded texture. It's very, very good. And the reason I had to prime it basically is because I had to add my own cast texture, and then I need to basically check if it was looking nice, so I prime it and get a nice solid color on there, and I can kind of compare my work to the areas of the kit. So most of the cast texture I added was basically just along the seam line and then kind of blending it in. And I was actually looking at the real thing. There is actually kind of like a seam line. I guess it's kind of like from the molding process, whatever, how they do this, because it's a cast turret. So I, of course, kind of left a little bit of a nasty looking blob kind of along there. It's not a weld seam, it's just like a casting seam. This piece also is a cast piece of metal. There's no cast texture on the kit. And then I've also had to, actually there's a really, really bad fit basically around the front here, because there's basically a top, a bottom of the turret, and there's a rear and a front. And the front piece is kind of, might be able to see kind of the seam line is basically down there, and it kind of goes along. And essentially I had to fill that area quite heavily, because the fit along the side of the turret actually was very, very good. On the rear was very, very good as well, but the front piece had a bit of a gap. So when I had to fill that, of course, I had to do lots of cast texture work. And the kit comes with a whole bunch of little tie downs basically along the front here, and all that down the side, because they also give you an option for a canvas covered mantlet. And the tie downs are molded into the turret, and they're basically right at the very, very edge of the main turret component here. So when I had to fill that area, they were basically right on the seam line that I was filling. So I basically had to slice all those little details off to be able to actually kind of, like work in there and get the cast texture going. So a little bit of a bummer there, but I mean, they're not really important. I guess I might have left the ones on the bottom here. I'm not sure if that's what they are, but I kind of like those little details there anyway, so I'm going to leave them on. And of course, I was actually looking at some photos, and it looks like there's maybe I'm not sure if it's a seam or there's like an extended bit kind of along the side of the mantlet here, like at the very, very base, close to this large round bolt thingy. It kind of is like wider. It sticks out more here. The kit part is obviously flat. I have no idea what that's all about. I didn't really feel like recreating it, so I just left it, whatever. Also, the gun barrel is it's very, very long. It's also molded in two parts. It's a half gun barrel. That's a little bit of a problem. I mean, I actually think I did a pretty good job filling it. Might need to do a little bit more work, but it looks pretty good. The main issue though is that there's threading at the muzzle. Hopefully you can see this, but basically it's threaded there because the muzzle brake would screw on in real life. And because of that, like, you got a seam line through the threading there. And I think I've done a pretty good job of getting rid of it. You can kind of still see something, but I mean, I think that's not actually visible once I prime the barrel. Hopefully that goes away, but it was a lot of work to kind of rescribe the threading detail through the seam line there that I had to kind of fill. But overall, the actual fit of the barrel is very, very good. I didn't have to use any putty. Basically, I just put some extra thin on there and then kind of squeeze it together, and that'll kind of melt it together and also kind of rises up a little bit. Then you kind of basically sand that down. That kind of almost acts as filler. But overall, it was actually very, very good to build. It went together very, very well, apart from what I was talking about the very, very front there. The whole rest of it basically fits together flawlessly. The actual cupola, like the whole cupola base, is one big clear part. So you might be able to see that I've actually masked off the clear parts, and then when I primed over top of it, hopefully when I paint that and remove the masking there, I'll be able to see the actual clear bit, hopefully. I'm not sure if that's going to work out, but I hope so. And they actually give you some good casting marks, like you might be able to see. There's words molded in here and a couple other points, or not really words, but numbers and stuff like that. There also should be something else in the rear. If you look at the actual photos of the rear of the real thing, there should be something here. There's also kind of like some weird casting, like it looks almost like a big like mold where they pump it in, like a big kind of like mark there. They don't give you that in the kit, and once again, I wasn't really too interested in actually kind of recreating that, so I just kind of didn't do it. Because this kit isn't, like I've been saying, it isn't the most overly detailed thing ever, so I don't really want to go all out adding some bits of detail when I don't have, like, you know, photo etch or anything like that in the kit. The 50 cal machine gun is actually very, very good. I had to drill out the muzzle there because it wasn't hollow, and I'll probably also do the same thing with the actual sight there, because it is also a solid piece, but they should be hollow. A couple points I had to kind of use a little bit of filler on there, you might be able to see, because it's molded in halves basically, but it did go together very, very well, and it looks nicely molded with all the details on there. So now let's look at the rest of the hull components. So to start off, the front of the hull in real life is one big metal piece, one big cast piece. In the kit, it's actually two parts. You have a top and a bottom. So we see the top and a bottom. And then we put them together, there's a little bit of a gap. So when I filled it, I just took that opportunity to actually give another cast seam there, not a weld seam, a cast seam. Photos of the real thing kind of show that there. I also worked on the cast section on the front here. The turret, like I was saying earlier, had a good cast texture, so I didn't have to fix most of it, only around the seams. But here it was a little bit weaker, so I worked on it with some putty. Just my typical method, where basically I just stipple on some Tamiya putty and then go over lightly with a sanding stick and kind of smooth it out. I'll link my video in the top here. It'll be kind of up in the top over here. The front hatches here also come with a molded on cast texture. It's also a little bit weak, but I couldn't really fix it because there's details molded on. So when I put the putty on there and sand it down, I would have had to basically destroy those details. So not much of an option there, but I'll just leave it there. I think it looks good as is, and hopefully it'll add a little bit of contrast between the cast texture here and the cast texture there and the cast texture in the turret. Maybe look a little bit interesting, I'm not sure. These guards for the actual viewports there are actually very nice. There was very minimal seam lines on them, and they're actually quite fine. I mean, metal would be better, but it's probably one of the best I've seen, better than what I got in like the Trumpeter T62 that I was working on a while back. That was pretty nasty, but these are actually really good. So that was cool to see. I figured I'd give you guys a close-up there, but as you can see, nice detail there. These spare track brackets in the front are actually one big component. The tracks and everything is all molded on. So there was a little bit of a seam line kind of on the side because it's a very, very large detail, so you get a little bit of a seam there. But it was nice to see that they were molded in one piece, and it was pretty easy to clean up. I want to point out that the guards here for the lights are a little bit thick in some areas, but they look pretty good actually. But the middle kind of metal bit from that one, you might be able to see that I had to do a little bit of filling there where it meets this big piece on the front because the hole for it was way bigger than the actual piece was. So there was a big hole there, so I had to work on that a little bit. Over on this side, you might be able to see that, yeah, they're quite thick. Like the metal here, or I guess what would be metal in real life here is quite thick because it's plastic. Same thing over here. It could be a little bit better, but I mean, it looks decent. It's basically as good as you can get with plastic without making it fall apart on the sprue, so can't really complain there. The actual tow cables are very nice. They're a metal, kind of like what you get in Dragon kits, but it's a lot more flexible, so I didn't have to basically clamp it and glue it the entire way down to get to form. I've just actually I haven't glued it down, I've just basically mounted it by just sticking it through these little plastic parts they give you in the kit to tie it down and glue those down. That basically keeps it in place for now, so I like that tow cable a lot. It's very, very good. So the fender is actually very simple. You basically just have the side skirt part, the actual main body piece, and then of course the actual top piece, which kind of just like slots on. So it's only 3 parts, apart from the little details you put on, like, you know, the little mounts here for the tow cable, the light at the front, and also all these little hatches, or sorry, not hatches, I guess they're handles for the hatches. Now they're very, very small, and you have to clean them up because the way that Takom molds them is they put a very small attachment point. The only attachment point is right at the top, at the back here. I don't know why they could just put it at the bottom of the back, because then it would be against where you actually just glue the part on. But instead they mold it at the top, so it's exposed. Basically you have to somehow manage to sand off that molding point on top of these little tiny details here, which are, you know, they're very small. It's hard to even hold them with your fingers and then kind of get in there and sand it. It's very, very difficult. So it took me a while to actually just basically do the cleanup on these, I guess 10 or so on each side, little tiny pieces. So that was a little bit of a weird thing. I think they could have just easily molded easily engineered the sprue point to be on the bottom of the part, in the exact same part, or the exact same place where it is, and then you just save, like, you know, an hour of tiny little fiddly cleanup. So in the rear here we have the exhausts. Now on the other side I left the exhaust fine, but on this side, since I sliced off a section of the fender, I actually decided to do some damage here. Actually, for the fender, I'll talk about how we did that first. Basically I just hacked this section off with my sprue cutters and just kind of an older pair of sprue cutters, not my new ones, because I want to keep them nice and sharp. But it's actually pretty straightforward. I basically just had to slice off a section there, and I just kind of smoothed it out and thin it down a little bit. But the kit parts were actually quite thin, so it was pretty easy to do that. Of course, I actually had to fill a section in here because there's actually a big section where the actually I'll just show you by taking off it up here. You can see there's basically a little hole, and there's basically a piece that kind of sticks out on the fender itself that just kind of slots it in there. And I had to fill that spot obviously because it's basically just a big hole there, and I don't want that, so I had to fill it in. And also on the opposite side of the vehicle, I decided to fill it in as well because the way that it fits in, it's actually kind of exposed. Once you actually put the fender on there, that's a little bit of a gap. Here, I'll show you that quick. You can see here that even when the part's attached on all the way, you can still see basically where I filled it, because a little bit of that little slot there is exposed on the top, so you basically see it and it looks kind of bad. So I just filled it on both sides, honestly. But the actual exhausts themselves are very nicely designed. They're basically in halves. You might be able to still see a little bit of the leftover stuff. I've actually basically sanded the smoother now. You can probably just see a little bit of it still because of how it basically went together. But there's a seam down the middle because it's two halves, kind of like a barrel. But the way they designed it is that the seam is basically a long part of where this elevated little piece basically goes. So most of it's hidden. I guess on the bottom side it's still there, but you can't actually see that, so it doesn't matter. And then meanwhile on the front here, the fit is very nice, so I didn't have to use any filler here. I just basically did the old, put some extra thin on there and squeeze it so that when it basically, like the glue gets in there, it also kind of melts it and it kind of pushes out a little bit. That kind of compresses the plastic along that little gap there and squeezes it a little bit, and you can basically use that as almost like filler because you basically just made the piece fill itself, and you can just kind of smooth it a little bit and it's good. And as you can see, the actual kind of like hole there for the exhaust is very thin and it's very nicely done. So on this fender I did some damage because it's over the exposed or the removed bit of fender basically. And it's pretty easy. I just basically hacked at it with a knife and a file. But actually the actual main part is quite thick, as you can see here. I had to really kind of thin it down a little bit to get that hole in there. So if you want to do this kind of thing, it's a little bit of effort, but it actually looks pretty good in the end. I like that a lot, definitely. And you can't really bend it. You basically have to like scrape sections out of it and make it look like it's like a bend, but it really just a divot in the plastic. So in the rear of the tank, all the modifications I did I've already mentioned. Weld seams on there and replacing this actual piece of plastic here, because that was basically a little rod molded onto this actual part here, and there was a little bit of a seam on it and like an actual sprue attachment point. So when I basically cut off the sprue, I was like, I don't want to do cleanup there, so I just basically just sliced that piece off and replaced it with a piece of styrene rod. I think that's like 20 thousandths of an inch. It was the exact same size. This actual barrel travel lock is actually fully movable, so you can probably actually leave the actual top part of the clamp here that holds the barrel on separate, so you can probably actually, if you want to, you can just leave this all fully workable, swing the tank around, put the barrel in there and close it up. Should be pretty good. There were pin marks. Only place on the kit that there were pin marks I had to fill was right kind of in there. There was a pin mark on the outer surface of this piece. You might be able to see that I've actually kind of just sanded down a little bit with a little bit of putty in there. And I mean, it was kind of weird that there was a pin mark on the outside there because there was no other pin marks on any exposed parts in the kit. But I mean, it was there. I had to fill that up on both sides. So finally, let's look at the lower hull components. I actually did the entire wheel and track section kind of like this. I've been doing this lately because it's such easier to paint it that way. They give you a jig in the kit to put the tracks together, but since I glued them like this, I just used the wheels as the jig themselves. Now the tracks in the kit are Lincoln length style, which basically means that you get two big straight sections for the top, and then you get little individual ones, like, you know, about I guess 5 or 7 or so along here, then another straight section there, a couple more for the curve here, individual ones, and then basically a long straight section and so on. So you probably only have about 30 pieces total for the entire track assembly rather than, like, you know, 150 individual links. So it's pretty easy that way. But well, remember when I said a minute ago that the only place there were pin marks on the kit were right there? Well, that's true for the hull, but basically the tracks also had pin marks all over them. So for the straight sections, every third link had a pin mark on both sides of the guide horn, and then every individual link also had basically a pin mark on it. So I'm going to show you So I didn't clean up the pin marks in the top here because the side skirts hide this bit of the tracks. So you can basically see that there are pin marks there, and they are sunken pin marks. You have to fill them in and then sand them down. And I mean, it's just unnecessary work. Like, they probably could have designed it to not do that. I don't know. Because I've had lots of tracks in the past without pin marks on them, so I'm not sure why that's a thing. But basically, extra work there. A pain in the butt really to get rid of all those all over the entire length, you know, all the way down there. So, I mean, that's a little bit bad and a little bit annoying. So essentially the two biggest complaints I have with this kit, which are the tracks having pin marks all over them and the barrel being in halves, are the only two things you can't really fix because there's no aftermarket barrel yet and there's no aftermarket tracks yet. At least with the duckbills, I'm pretty sure there aren't tracks like that. You might have the standard size, which are what are on the Pershing, I'm pretty sure, but you won't have the duckbills. So nothing much you can do about that. I mean, they're not the worst thing in the world. The barrel fits together very nicely. I didn't have any issues really. It was just, you know, annoying having to sand all that down because everybody hates two-part barrels. And the tracks, again, I mean, it could have been way worse. You could have had, like, you know, like would have had individual links sometimes where the whole guide horns are always mismolded, or separate guide horns, which are even worse. But honestly, you basically just have to put a little bit of putty on those things and just sand them down. It took maybe an extra hour or so, but I mean, it could have been worse. So that wraps up this review for you guys here. I hope I didn't make the kit seem too bad by talking about basically only things that were replaced by me or improved or something like that, or the problems. But it is a very good kit. I had lots of fun building it. The fit is very good. The instructions are very good. The engineering is kind of good in many ways. Like the barrel is well done. The fact that it fits very, very well. Lots of the small details are very well molded. But a couple of the things, like, you know, the tracks having pin marks all over them, all those little handles having the molding point on basically what I would call the wrong side. And a couple of the points of that kind of make it seem like the Takom is still kind of new, so they're kind of figuring what they're doing, but it's definitely lots of fun. It builds up pretty quick, apart from like the long process for the suspension, and it builds up to be a very, very large, impressive tank, so I do like it a lot. And I do recommend this kit. If you have at least, like, let's say 3 kits under your belt, you should have no trouble at all. I mean, you might have a little bit of trouble filling the seam there, but I mean, it's just basically filling it, and you don't have to do a perfect job because you don't have to sand it down all the way because you don't want to, because you want to make it look like a cast texture. So I do recommend this. It's a good kit. I enjoyed it a lot, and it kind of also sucks that the only 2 things that really kind of are the most important things to replace in most kits, which are like the tracks and the gun barrel, are the only things that don't have aftermarket options available for them right now. So hopefully we'll get some new barrels soon or something like that, but I mean, it's a good barrel. Like, everything, the fit is good in the kit, like I said. And thank you for watching. Of course, let's thank the patrons. We have Ricky from Ryan's Painting, John Butler, Ian Sistrick, Sam Murphy, Richard Ward, Johnny Foxtrot, Rudolph Kiraz, Oliver Hunt, the British Mauler, and of course Mikhail and Eistruck, or Mika, I don't know, sorry, I can't pronounce your name. It's either Mika and Eistruck or Mikhail Eistruck. And thank you very much, guys. It means a lot to me that you will support me on Patreon. It definitely helps me out a lot with the channel here, getting things to put in the videos for you guys. And of course, I also need to thank Dr. EO, who supports me the same way, but through PayPal. It means a lot to me, guys. Thank you very much. And of course, thanks for watching and commenting below. If you have any specific questions about this kit, feel free to ask them. I'll try to answer them if I can, but I hope I covered everything in this video. Yes, it is a good kit. Like I've been saying, I don't want to make it sound like it's a bad kit by talking about all the things I fixed and all the issues, but I mean, it's a lot easier talking about all the issues and all the things that were right, because you kind of expect things to be right in the kit. So it's a great kit. If you can get it for a good price, definitely pick this one up. It's a good addition to the stash. It's a super awesome project. It looks really impressive, and it's definitely a very fun kit. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next one. Goodbye.